Would you all pray with me? Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The women had already told them the truth, but they couldn't believe it. Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and other women came to the 11 male disciples and told them what they had seen. They had gone to take care of Jesus' body, but the stone of the tomb had been rolled away, and he wasn't there. 2 men in dazzling clothes announced to them that Jesus had risen. And the women ran back to the house where the men were hiding away, and they tell them. But to the men, those words seemed like an idle tale, too good to be true, and so they do not believe them. And then 2 of those men set off down the road to the village of Emmaus. It was a Friday. It was a Friday when we said goodbye, when we fastened the car seat of our first foster kid into a strange social worker's car, loaded up the trunk with all of his clothes, and then a full wardrobe of the next size up for when he got big, toys and books, and waved as the car drove away. The rest of that day is a total haze to me. I think we walked around Jamaica Pond, but I do not really remember. Then, 2 days later, Sunday, I pack my bag in the morning for church, drove 40 minutes south to the church that I served at the time, parked my car, only to realize that I had forgotten my church keys at home. I was always the first one there, and so I would just have to wait until a kind usher arrived to let us all in. And I seemed to be wearing like the grungiest of sneakers that I owned and like no other church shoes packed. Grief does strange things to our brains. Our nervous systems get overloaded with impossible to process facts. We forget things. People often lock themselves out of their homes or their cars, forget appointments or meetings or what someone just said to them. Their brains are otherwise occupied. And these disciples, hidden away in their room, they are drenched in grief. They had understood the world was one way, and that world does not exist anymore. Their minds have flown away from their bodies to find a place to rest, a place that felt safe now that safety seemed like a far-off dream. Now that the dream that they had given themselves to has turned into a total nightmare. 2 of them walk down the road together, talking about everything that had happened. It was a 7-mile walk, and I imagine that they felt every step as they walked away from Jerusalem, away from where they had witnessed with horror as Jesus was killed. And then they're approached by this stranger who asks them what they're talking about. And they ask, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know what's happened?" And they proceed to tell the man all about Jesus, how he lived and how he died. And they say, "We had hoped he would be the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped. We had hoped that he would be the one to save us. We had hoped he'd be the one to turn the empire around. We had hoped he would restore our people. We had hoped that the first would finally be last and the powerful would be laid low. We had hoped that our children would grow up in a different world than the one we grew up in. We had hoped. And now our hope has shattered in front of our eyes. Had hoped. So much of the bleakest of our human experience can be wrapped up in those two words. Leaving the hospital, his wedding ring hanging from her necklace, we had hoped that the treatment would work. Or when the loved one falls back into addiction again, we had hoped that last time would have been the last time. Or sitting on the floor, your heart in pieces, I had hoped he'd be the one who would stay. Quiet on the end of a phone call with a medical team. We had hoped that that test would come back negative. Or staring at the screen of breaking news. We had hoped that the warring of the nations had ended. Standing over the fresh grave of our deepest hopes, that our loved ones would thrive, that our children would be safe, that peace would reign among the people. We had dared to hope that the world would work out one way, and it seems to have taken a terrible turn. And our minds can barely take it in. Days pass. We forget our keys. We forget to shower. We say the thing out loud that we should have kept to ourselves, but we are just too tired to care. We wish that one day we would wake up and everything would be better, that we would be healed and whole, and so would our world, that God was some sort of magic fairy with a wand to wave over a troubled world. I know I have wished that. We can tell the Easter story as the story where Jesus once and for all defeated death, and that Jesus' rising means that death does not have dominion over us, and we would be telling the truth. And to our grief-clouded selves, the good news of the resurrection can seem like an idle tale. But what if resurrection is a grittier thing than the trumpets would proclaim? What if our own rising is more of a journey than a destination suddenly reached? The text proclaims that the disciples on the road were kept from seeing that the man they encountered was the risen Christ himself. Perhaps grief had so clouded their minds and their vision that they did not know him. Or perhaps he really did look different. He had been through a great ordeal, after all. They didn't know him when he was teaching, and they didn't know him when he was listening to their questions. It wasn't until the day had turned to dusk, and together they sat at a table. And he took bread, and he blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him at the table, breaking bread. In the days after our last foster child left, a friend brought over an entire 11 by 17 pan of baked ziti. There are two of us. Another friend left a bottle of wine and homemade cookies just inside our door. Other friends, ones who have known great heartache, brought over dinner and ate with us, not needing to say too much at all. A meal. A meal can put us back together. A meal can remind us who we are, can remind us that at least we are not alone. A meal at its core is sustenance for the journey. And our journeys, every single one of them, just keep going. Jesus so often gathered people around tables. It was the most characteristic thing he could do. More than teaching, more even than healing, he gathered folks up and shared bread and fish and wine at tables of the rich and the lowly alike. He does not come back as a conquering hero, vanquishing the powers of Rome and the religious rulers. He does not come back with a sword, but with scars and a story of his own to tell. And he offers his friends what he always had: warm bread, enough to go around; good wine, enough to warm up a cold night; and a long table, enough seats for anyone who would need a place to rest. Sustenance, enough for the journey ahead of them. And this is what rising looks like this side of heaven. That when all hell breaks loose in your life, and when grief clouds your ability to perceive the good news, may there always be for you an open door, warm bread, blessed and broken and passed around. And may it sustain you for the journey to come. Amen.